Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. If you enjoying this fanfic then press the like button and subscribe my channel.
Which is what if Kurenai hated Naruto just like others but slowly fell in love with him. Naruto x Kurenai Part 2. Naruto, having been about to give him the pad answer, closed his mouth and collected his thoughts. When he was done, he simply stared down toward the counter and answered Aruka, I guess a lot of things. My fear of what might happen in light of my own history with women is a small part of it, but there's more to it than that. I mean, this is Kurenai Yuhi we're talking about, here. And, while I know now that she's not the Ice Queen that she's been made out to be, she's 14 years older than me, I might as well be a kid to her. And on top of that, I don't want to do anything that will make her feel uncomfortable or uneasy with me. I mean, I know how to behave like a gentleman, and I try very hard to be one, but at the same time, I've never been in a relationship that's lasted for any significant length of time. I wouldn't know how to be good partner to anyone. But there's also the fact that she's suffered through her own pain as well, and I certainly don't want to add to that, inadvertently or otherwise. Naruto turned his attention back to Iruka. I guess it all boils down to the fact that I feel that I don't have anything to offer her that she would need. What would someone like her see in someone like me, you know? Iruka had adopted a knowing smirk that only grew as Naruto had explained his reasoning. He had to have picked that up from Anko, he thought to himself. Iruka then answered, in an amused and knowing tone, that's what you're worried about. You don't feel like you have anything to offer her. Naruto nodded in a somewhat helpless fashion. Iruka continued, okay, where to begin? Here's what you have to offer a woman like Kurenai. He began to tally using his fingers as he listed the things that Naruto did in fact have to offer. A stable home, a steady career and income, real friendship without any ulterior motive, genuine companionship, the potential to build a family, a man who can protect her or her loved ones from just about any threat out there, and from what you're telling me, someone who has the ability to make her laugh or smile almost on command. If these things aren't good enough for a woman, then frankly she doesn't deserve you. He's right, Naruto, came the voice of Tsuki who, with Ayame, had started listening with interest to the two, and from what I saw when the two of you were last in here, I don't think that a potential future with her is really that far-fetched. Ayame added, that's true, Naruto. I think you might have a very good thing within reach. And even if things don't necessarily go the way you'd like, at least you went for it, and I think with the kind of person Kurenai seems to be, you wouldn't be any worse off for trying. Naruto still seemed to be a bit uneasy at the possibility of pursuing anything further at this point. Sensing his unease the way only a woman could, Ayame added, Naruto, nobody's saying you have to jump into the deep end headfirst. If you're that nervous, just be friends with her for now, and pay a little attention to the signals she sends. If you don't know how to interpret them, you can come to me, and I can tell you what they mean, okay? Iruka and Tsuki both nodded in agreement, impressed at the wisdom of Ayame's suggestion. This also seemed to ease Naruto quite a bit as well, as he visibly relaxed at Ayame's advice in her offer to help him navigate through the waters of female subtlety that most men often found very treacherous. Naruto smiled and nodded in gratitude to the three of them, thanks, guys. I really appreciate the advice, and I think I'll do what you suggested, Ayame. Ayame smiled warmly and nodded, that's what your real friends are here for, buddy. Tsuki and Ayame both took their leave of the pair to go take some other orders and also to prepare Iruka's and Naruto's own meals for them. As they waited, Iruka continued in an effort to keep making conversation, so, tell me about Kurenai's apprenticeship and about the training you two have been doing. Naruto's eyes lit up at this, as he began to recount the past week of training and work that he and Kurenai had been doing. Naruto, or more accurately, Naruto's shadow clone, was making his way to Grandma Tsunade's office to give his creator's report and make his request. He had just left his boss as the original Naruto had gone into Ikiraku's to grab some lunch. He thought he heard Iruka's voice come from the stand, and as much as he would have liked to say hi to Iruka-sensei himself, he was created at his boss's leisure for his boss's purposes. Sometimes being a shadow clone really ed. Yeah, I hope you enjoy your time slacking off while making me do all your dirty work, you jerk, he thought bitterly, as he made his way to talk to the Hokage. As he walked down the road, the villagers all smiled and waved to him as they normally did. He, in turn, greeted them back as he continued on his way. For some reason, a leisurely stroll to the Hokage's office just felt kind of nice right now. It had nothing to do with the fact that he would have to dispel the moment he was finished with his business in Tsunade's office. Not at all. He thankfully only crossed paths with two fangirls on his way to the Hokage Tower, politely turning both away, and continuing forward. Well, it could certainly have been worse. He thought as he remembered the occasional stampede of fangirls that he used to have to outrun, and even flash away from on occasion. Granted, he didn't have to deal with stampedes anymore, but the occasional fangirl, or group of fangirls, was still a major pain in his backside. He had finally arrived at the Hokage Tower and began to make his way up the winding staircase to the level where Tsunade's office was located. As he entered the reception area, he saw Shizune at her station happily, a little too happily in his opinion, preparing several 3-foot-high piles of paperwork for Tsunade to read through and complete. Shizune, I really hope those aren't for me, said Naruto, already beginning to feel that there were certain things about being Hokage that he would find very distasteful. Shizune looked up and smiled at seeing her current visitor. Oh hey, Naruto. No, don't worry, these require Tsunade's signature directly, you have nothing to worry about, at least not from any of these piles. Good to know, he replied, knowing that Tsunade would use training for the office of Hokage as a convenient excuse to slough some of her paperwork onto Naruto. While it was good training for him, she had a tendency to make him do more than he should have had to at this point. Although, it was this little problem that helped Naruto to find the perfect solution: send a shadow clone to Tsunade's office on the days where he was being trained for Hokage duties. This gave him an even more brilliant flash of inspiration. He could use many shadow clones at once to get paperwork done more quickly. Of course he had made it a point not to do this, because he knew that Tsunade would just give him more and more of her responsibilities and paperwork while she could sit back and drink to her heart's content. He decided very early that she was not going to do that to him, and that he would wait until he actually was Hokage before using that little trick of his. Tsunade might hate his guts for a little while for not sharing that little tidbit with her, but Naruto knew her far too well to believe that she would use it herself instead of making him do it all. Naruto brought himself back to the task at hand, asking playfully, "So, is the old bat in?" Shizune mock glared at him for the way he addressed her mentor as she responded with mock anger, "Yes, she is. Let me see if the Lady Hokage is available." She rolled her eyes as she rose from her desk to knock on Tsunade's door. Naruto gave a low chuckle as she walked by. Shizune knocked on Suon's door, and upon being prompted, she opened the door, announcing to Tsunade that Naruto was there. After a few seconds, Shizune closed the door. Turning to Naruto, her mock glare and mock angry tone back in full force, but this time with a seemingly playful smirk as well, she said to him, "The old bat will see you now." Naruto smirked right back at her. He thanked her and then approached the door of Tsunade's office, grabbing the handle and pulling it open. He entered and made his presence known. "Good afternoon, Lady Hokage." Tsunade raised an eyebrow and narrowed her eyes at him, asking suspiciously, "You're a shadow clone, aren't you?" Naruto began to sweat a little as he responded, How did you know? You didn't make any jabs at my age, or make any comments that might cause me to attack you. I would therefore draw the conclusion that you don't want me to do anything that would cause you to dispel." Naruto sighed in resignation. "Okay, you got me. I'm a clone." Tsunade gave a satisfied smirk, as though she'd just pulled one over on Naruto, even if only in her own mind, before continuing, "Now that that's settled, why exactly are you here on Naruto's day off?" Naruto adopted an all-business posture before answering this question, for two reasons. 1. To inform you of a couple of projects I've taken up, and a Fuinjutsu apprentice that I've recently taken on, and 2. To commission an extended A-rank mission for Kurenai Yuhi's services. If she had been satisfied before at having gotten one over on Naruto, she was now floored and feeling as though Naruto had just gotten 5 over on her. Schooling her features as best she could, she posed a question: why exactly are you commissioning an A-rank mission as a client? And why Kurenai, specifically? Naruto answered her in his all-business tone: that will be made clear as I tell you about the other reason I'm here. Naruto then proceeded to tell her of his training and work with Kurenai over the past week. The day following Kurenai's encounter with Naruto in Konoha Cemetery, Kurenai was at the cast iron gate that allowed entry into the Namikaze estate at 8 a.m. sharp, just as they had arranged so that they could have some breakfast and begin training. As soon as she walked up, the gate opened itself, revealing Naruto in front of her. "Good morning," he greeted her cheerfully. "Good morning," she greeted in response with a smile of her own as she entered the estate. Naruto led her to the house so that they could have breakfast. He led her to the dining room where he served her a typical shinobi breakfast of rice, fish and roasted pork, with water, fruit juice and green tea. Having already assembled his own plate, he took the place next to her and both of them began eating. As they ate, Naruto began his lessons to Kurenai so as to make the best use of time. "Okay," he began, his voice taking on a rather Iruka-like character as he entered teacher mode. "While we get ready for today's training, I want to go a little more into chakra theory and application as far as it applies to how I'm going to train you." With a frown of concentration on her face indicating that she was paying close attention to what he was saying, she nodded in understanding as he continued: "You already have a very good grasp on what chakra is, and how it can be universally applied, honed and fine-tuned, so we'll skip all that. What I do want to cover, though, is the importance of training chakra reserves and control through as many methods as possible, and in all of the ninja arts we use, not just the arts that we specialize in." Kurenai nodded again, her frown deepening as she remembered her mistake in only focusing on genjutsu. Naruto seemed to catch this, however, and began to reassure her: "You're not the first person to make that mistake, and you're not the only one in the village who is, right now. Kakashi, for example, tends to focus too much on chakra control for ninjutsu training only, and has very little if any chakra control training aimed at genjutsu or taijutsu. Guy tends to concentrate on taijutsu, to an even greater degree than Kakashi focuses on his ninjutsu chakra training, leading him to have very little control over ninjutsu and genjutsu, except for that god-awful Sunset Cliffs genjutsu." Naruto added the last bit with a subdued voice and a shudder, causing Kurenai to giggle softly. Naruto smiled as he continued: "One thing you'll notice about Grandma Tsunade is that she focuses her chakra control in two specific disciplines, medical ninjutsu and taijutsu, which is the main reason why her control is as fine-tuned as it is, though I think her senju blood probably has something to do with that as well, as her control over her naturally higher reserves is something of a talent she possesses. Sakura, for example, has naturally perfect chakra control, but her reserves have always been rather low. She can control her chakra better than Tsunade can, but she can't do anywhere near as many jutsu, and certainly not to the degree of power that Tsunade can, without running out of chakra rather quickly. The Hyuga clan are another example of refined chakra control concentrated only on taijutsu, control made better as they individually train their Byakugan. So, as you can see, more shinobi than not tend to make the mistake of not diversifying the areas and methods in which they control their chakra pools, essentially, lopsiding themselves and creating ceilings that they can't seem to get past, without actually discovering why. Of course, I only realized this as you were telling me about your problem yesterday, and I found myself thinking about what I knew about other great shinobi that I knew. Back on topic, though, we're taught that chakra is divided into two parts, physical and spiritual. Physical is linked to the body, spiritual is linked to the mind and soul. Kurenai nodded once more, showing Naruto that he hadn't lost her. Naruto continued, this paradigm is oversimplified to the point where it gives an inaccurate understanding that doesn't hold water when applying more advanced methods of chakra training. It's true that these are the two sources that a person draws from when molding chakra, but Naruto paused for a moment to once again make sure that he had Kurenai's undivided attention. Kurenai, sensing the importance of what he was about to say, nodded for him to continue, making sure to note what he said. Naruto continued upon seeing this, there is a lot more to advanced chakra training than simply molding physical and spiritual energies into the appropriate quantities, as I shall now list the concepts that I've observed are important. 1. The speed and volume at which we can make our chakra flow through our chakra networks. 2. The tenketsu points and how our chakra can flow through them, or be released through them to create different effects. 3. The innate feel of our own chakra signatures, and how they feel different from other chakra signatures. 4. And this one is primarily geared towards ninjutsu, but it can be applied to the other ninja arts as well. The nature and shape of the chakra that we wish to mold after we've mixed the two base energies together in the appropriate quantities, and the different effects that this has, both in how the shape and nature of the chakra behave, and in how effective they are when performing specific jutsu. These are the things I've managed to observe so far, but I'm sure that's only the tip of the iceberg. Kurenai just sat there in rapt attention, fascinated by his exposition on chakra theory. Seeing that he was done for now, she decided to venture a question, how exactly did you discover all of this? Naruto smiled, pleased at her interest in learning more about this subject, as he answered, well, a lot of it was just from instances where I can remember people explaining certain jutsu to me. Remember when Neji and I fought in our first Chunin exam finals? Kurenai nodded in response, recalling the event. Naruto continued, well, during the course of that fight, he explained to me how his 8 trigrams rotation technique worked. He basically releases equal amounts of chakra through all 361 of his tenketsu points simultaneously. Only the Byakugan allows for the degree of concentration required to be able to do this. The degree of chakra control that Neji possesses that's geared towards the gentle fist is probably on par with the chakra control that you have towards genjutsu, and yet, Neji has no genjutsu to really speak of in his arsenal. Another example of lopsided chakra control. Another case in point, Kakashi. His chakra control over ninjutsu is almost unparalleled in the ninja world, and it's probably outstripped only by mine. Again, going back specifically to changes in chakra shape and changes in chakra nature, these are the building blocks to all advanced and specialized ninjutsu. Even if he can't do them all himself, Kakashi knows how to train all of the basic changes in chakra nature: fire, water, earth, lightning and wind. It was Kakashi who trained me in wind chakra manipulation, even though I've never seen the man use a single wind-style jutsu. Greater and greater levels of understanding flashed in Kurenai's eyes as she continued to listen to Naruto's lecture. Thinking about it now, in light of what Naruto had just said to her, she could think of countless numbers of examples where these ideas proved themselves true. Naruto noticed her understanding, and the excitement that her newfound understanding seemed to bring her. He began to feel rather satisfied with himself, both with his knowledge of this subject, and with his teaching style. Naruto, wanting to make sure that she understood, asked her, so do you have any more questions about what we've just gone over? She shook her head in the negative. Actually, no. I think you covered it pretty well. Good, said Naruto with a smile before continuing, but now, knowing all of this, let's talk some about how we'll start applying it all. Kurenai nodded with a smile and an excited gleam in her eye, her interest having been awakened by Naruto. Fascinated by just how technical the more advanced theories of chakra training were, she couldn't wait to apply it all and see just how all of it worked. Of course, now that she'd had a chance to rest and reflect on everything that happened yesterday, she was able to conduct herself and present her emotions in a more subdued and less ostentatious way, like she was more inclined to do. Since she had woken up this morning and thought about it, she was rather surprised at herself that she had acted in such an out of character way yesterday. She could only attribute it to all of the surprises that she had been presented with, on a day where she would be more emotional than usual. Thoughts of Asuma came back to her as she reflected on yesterday's events, but surprisingly, they didn't affect her as strongly as she thought they would, nor did they cause her to feel sadness or grief. This both confused and scared her a little bit, but she decided to set this aside for now and ponder it later. She brought herself back to the present, with Naruto being none the wiser as to her momentary lapse into nostalgia. After the two of them had finally finished breakfast, Naruto cleaned up the places before he continued his explanation once more. Now, after giving this a little more thought, I've made a few changes to our training schedule. We're going to start by training your body and your taijutsu. While we're doing this, we're not only going to make your body stronger, quicker and faster, we're also going to be adding chakra in different ways to increase speed, power, and even precision. We'll focus on that for now so as not to spread you too thin and to avoid doing too much at once. I'll also begin your Fuinjutsu education today after lunch. For now, though, if you would please follow me, he finished as he stood up and began to walk towards the back door. Kurenai got up and followed him as he opened the door, both of them stepping out into the rear grounds towards the training dojo. Kurenai was astounded when she walked inside the dojo. There were seals of many different patterns and shapes along the walls and ceiling, all of them glowing, indicating that they were currently active. She could only guess as to what their functions were, so she continued to look around. All around the room were wooden training dummies, posts and targets, as well as various different accessories all around the room. High-quality chakra weight devices, bracelets, ankle braces, and even belts to add weight to a person's center of gravity, kettlebells of various degrees of weight, chakra-enhanced wrist grips in order to enhance grip and grappling strength, as well as pull-up bars, floor mats, weighted balls and other devices for core and abdominal training, and even ropes that hung from the ceiling. Kurenai raised an eyebrow at this. Naruto, noticing her confusion, looked at where she was staring, and began to explain, these ropes are frictionless. They're used to enhance chakra control while enhancing muscular control and strength at the same time. Come here, I'll show you, and with that, he gestured to her to follow him and take a closer look at the ropes. When she did, she was close enough to see what appeared to be tiny seals etched into the fibers of the rope. Naruto pointed them out to her and explained them, you see two different patterns here. This first array, he pointed to one of the patterns on the rope, helps to preserve the integrity of the fibers of the rope, because the seals themselves would flay as the fibers of the rope do. They stop that from happening. This array, here, he pointed to another pattern, is what takes friction away from the rope. See, he finished as he rubbed his hand up and down the surface of the rope, no sound being made, and no traction on his hand, demonstrating the effectiveness of the seal. Kurenai tested it herself, raising her eyebrows as her hand ran smoothly across the surface of the rope, almost as though there was nothing in her hand. Naruto brought her attention back to himself. You'll learn to make seal arrays like these later, but you'll be using these ropes as part of your physical training. I'll demonstrate them later. Now, come on, I want to assess your physical capabilities, he finished, gesturing for her to once again follow him while he went to one corner of the room and grabbed some gear that looked to be a different color and shape than the rest of the gear in there. Kurenai followed on his heels while he did this, stopping when he stopped. After Naruto had collected the gear he needed, they turned around and asked her to put the gear on, a pair of bracelets, a pair of anklets, and what seemed to be some kind of padded loose-fit halter top that she could easily slip on and off. Naruto explained that the purpose of these devices was to indicate the optimal level of weight someone should wear when training their body in order to both maximize the effectiveness of the workout yet keep them free from injury at the same time. He instructed her to channel a steady stream of chakra into the devices. She did so, noticing that they were all getting heavier. She continued channeling her chakra into them until she began to feel somewhat strained, when the weights stopped getting heavier. Naruto told her to stop channeling chakra and he proceeded to take the weights off of her, looking on the inside surface of each. Kurenai looked at what Naruto was looking at, seeing that there were some numbers written on the inside of each piece of gear. Naruto informed her that the numbers were the ideal amounts of weight that she should wear on each appendage while performing physical training. Her ideal weights were reading as 45 pounds on her left wrist, 55 pounds on her right wrist, 80 pounds on her left ankle and 85 pounds on her right ankle. He had also informed her that she would start with the lower number on both wrists and both ankles, so that they could even themselves out, thus giving her body perfect balance. The halter top read 225 pounds, meaning that she would wear 225 pounds over her shoulders, chest and back while training her body and taijutsu. Kurenai had asked about the belts, seeing that there wasn't a belt that did what these other pieces of equipment did. Naruto told her that the belts would serve the same purpose as the halter top, and that they could be worn while performing pull-ups so that the weight could be a little lower on the body, making the exercise more effective. After recording these numbers, he pulled what looked like a pair of forearm-length gloves, and a pair of what would have been shin guards, except they were made of some kind of cloth instead of metal. Kurenai inserted her hand into each glove, and noticed that the portion that covered the forearm was open, and designed to be fastened around her forearms. She fastened, and repeated the process with the cloth, shin guards, fastening them around the back. Before she could put the halter top on, Naruto stopped her before bringing her into what appeared to be a changing room, with female-oriented training clothes. Naruto had told her, rather bluntly, to Kurenai's mild annoyance, that the bandage dress that she was currently in was not suitable for the training that she was about to undergo. Letting her know that the clothes were laced with seals that could either tighten or expand the fabric on the outfits to a degree, and showing her how to activate them, he left her in the room so she could change. When she came out wearing a red training GI that was just loose enough to allow her ease of movement, but tight enough to stay on her body. Over the GI was the halter top, and under the sleeves and legs of the GI were the greaves and the gauntlets, all set at the weights Naruto set them at. Naruto wore a satisfied smirk, while Kurenai wore an annoyed scowl. Naruto told her that she would thank him for this later, then proceeded to grab a pair of hand grippers that was of the same basic design as the gear that determined her initial weights were. Naruto handed them to her, and told her to grip them as tightly as she could. She did, and found it quite easy to grip them, before Naruto told her to add a steady flow of chakra to them while maintaining the grip. She did this, and the resistance steadily grew for a few seconds on each gripper. The gripper in her left hand stopped increasing in resistance before the one in her right hand did, indicating that her right grip was stronger than her left. She could apply 70 pounds of torque in her left hand, and 85 pounds of torque in her right. Naruto seemed to be quite impressed with this. Kurenai had a rather strong grip for a genjutsu specialist. Naruto told her that for exercises that were done one limb at a time, she would do 10% more repetitions for her weaker limb than for her stronger one, so that she could balance them out as she grew in strength and speed. From that point for the next 4 hours, Naruto would have Kurenai on physical training, with 45 pounds on each wrist, 80 pounds on each ankle, and 225 pounds over her chest, shoulders and back. Naruto actually put some training gear and weights of his own on so that he could perform his routine while she performed her own. He told her his own numbers to give her an idea of what she'd be working towards: 400 pounds on each wrist, 750 pounds on each ankle, and 2,500 pounds over the top of his body. Of course, Naruto had to do this using resistance and gravity seals, so that he wouldn't create craters in the ground as he was moving. He did have over 2 tons of weight dispersed throughout his body, after all. Her routine was 300 standard push-ups, 200 handstand push-ups, 200 fingertip push-ups, 200 laps around the borders of the Namikaze estate, including running over the lake using her chakra, 400 sit-ups, 200 pull-ups, 800 squats, 101 arm pull-ups with her right arm, 110 one-arm pull-ups with her left arm, 400 one-legged squats with her right leg, 441 legged squats with her left leg, 101 arm fingertip push-ups with her right arm, 110 one-arm fingertip push-ups with her left arm. His routine was 1000 standard push-ups, 800 handstand push-ups, 800 laps around the borders of the Namikaze estate, including running over the lake using his chakra, 2000 sit-ups, 1000 pull-ups, 2500 squats, 500 one-arm pull-ups with each arm, 1000 one-legged squats with each leg, 500 one-arm fingertip push-ups with each arm. After 3 hours, Kurenai finished with her routine, as compared to Naruto's 2.5 hours, and also left her breathing a lot heavier than him. Naruto told her, to her horror and extreme consternation, that they were not yet done. Seeing her getting steadily more angry, he reminded her that she was doing this to round herself out and ultimately overcome her own chakra ceiling. Bearing this in mind, though that didn't stop her from grumbling under her breath, she followed Naruto back into the dojo, where they began to use the training dummies and posts to perform taijutsu-related exercises. Kurenai's taijutsu routine, which she repeated 10 times, was 200 punches with her right hand, 220 punches with her left hand, 200 kicks with her right leg, 220 kicks with her left leg. Naruto's taijutsu routine, which he repeated 15 times, was 600 punches with each hand, 600 kicks with each leg. Both finished these routines at about the same time before cooling down with some stretching. Kurenai, still angry with Naruto, decided to give him a piece of her mind. She was a sight to see, panting hard, face flushed with exertion, hair disheveled and sticking to her forehead, sweat pouring down her face and drenching her GI, glaring at him while pointing in his direction, pausing between each word spoken through clenched teeth, gasping between each word, "You are evil." Naruto tried very hard not to laugh at this. He couldn't help but feel a little sympathy for the woman, who certainly wasn't used to this level of physical exertion, at least not with the amounts of weight that she was currently wearing, but at the same time, the trainer in him found this to be highly amusing. He settled for an amused smirk before telling her that she could take the weights off now, and also to go ahead and use one of the baths in the onsen inside the house to relax and clean herself up. She took off her gear and put it all away before leaving in a huff for the changing room to gather the clothes she came in and leave for the onsen. Naruto himself, not having worked up much of a sweat, decided to start on lunch for the pair while Kurenai was allowing the tension and soreness that was starting to come on to be relieved at least somewhat by the hot, mineral-induced water in Naruto's private springs. Naruto couldn't help but think with some amusement, I wonder how she'll react when we start adding harder exercises into the routine, as he prepared lunch over the kitchen counter. Lunch was a stir-fry of chicken and mixed vegetables over rice, making sure that there was an overly generous portion of chicken so that the extra protein would allow for faster muscle recovery. He had also prepared 3 gallows of ice-cold water for them to drink. He was certain that Kurenai would go through at least 2 gallons by herself. Once Naruto was finished, he noticed that Kurenai was walking, or rather, stumbling, in, eyes glazed over and mouth watering. She had evidently smelled lunch, and was ready for some. Naruto smiled at her as he asked, feeling better. Kurenai scowled at him once more as she sat down at the dining room table, but this time there was a mildly playful quality to it. She couldn't stay mad at him. After all, he had done more reps and sets than she had in every exercise, far more, and he had literally 10 times the weight on his body to boot. That was also what made it more infuriating to her. The fact that he didn't make her do anything that he didn't do himself. She was infuriated by the fact that he left her with no room to point fingers at anyone except herself. And taking ownership for your own deficiencies could be a real drag. Great. Naruto's turning me into a Nara, Kurenai thought to herself, both in amusement and annoyance. Naruto interrupted her musings by laying a plate of the dish that had her mouth watering, and invited her to dig in. He also brought the water to the table with a couple of glasses, and true to Naruto's suspicion, Kurenai downed several glasses of water, equating to about 3/4 of a gallon, before even touching her food. She didn't waste time eating, either, but she did notice, with some frustration, that she had a harder time gripping her chopsticks than usual, her forearms were tired and sore. Naruto, seeing her frustration, asked with a chuckle while pointing to her chopsticks, would you like me to help you, there? Kurenai's face turned red at the question, but whether from a blush or continued annoyance, Naruto couldn't tell. She simply chose not to answer the question as she continued trying to feed herself, experiencing some success, but not enough to sat her grumbling stomach. After a few minutes of this, she sighed in resignation. She turned to Naruto and asked somewhat sheepishly, is that offer for help still on the table? Naruto simply smiled and nodded at her, not wanting to embarrass her any further. He began to take portions of food that she could comfortably chew and feed her so that she could finish her lunch a little faster without completely abandoning her table manners. The mood began to lighten up as they made small talk over lunch, laughing and smiling with each other. After lunch was finished, Naruto informed Kurenai that it was time to get back to business. He led her into the workshop area in his library. He had set up a small workstation for her so that she could practice the basic fuinjutsu skills that he would be teaching her. She saw several scrolls, blank pieces of paper, and ink wells and brushes of various kinds. She took a seat at the place that he had set up for her as he went to one of his blank whiteboards and began lecturing. Okay, Kurenai, before we get started, I want to tell you up front, as hard of a taskmaster as you thought me to be with physical training, I am a much harder taskmaster and a stingy perfectionist when it comes to sealing. If you're going to be apprenticed by me in the art of fuinjutsu, there are some ground rules you'll need to agree to, first. Kurenai nodded in understanding. Being a master herself in the art of genjutsu, she would also set certain stipulations upon anyone wanting to apprentice under her to learn her art. She certainly didn't expect Naruto to be any different. Acknowledging her assent, Naruto began to list the ground rules that she would have to abide by while under his wing. First and foremost, unless for the purposes of study, you will never buy another sealing note, tag, or what have you from any store, or any other sealmaster ever again. This means you won't buy any more paper bombs or the like from the wolf's claw. If you need an exploding tag, or any other seal, you will learn to create your own. Kurenai raised an eyebrow in curiosity at this, but nodded in agreement, knowing that as with any art worth learning, understanding the reasons behind the rules would come in time. As an apprentice to Naruto, she decided that she would display the same humility that she would expect from an apprentice of her own. She simply kept her mouth shut and listened. Second, we will not move past a lesson until you have both completed the lesson and mastered the accompanying skills to my satisfaction, even if the lesson seems too mundane, or even if you've used the skills in the lesson before. Third, I have no problem with you asking questions, ask as many as you want. The more you ask, the more you'll learn, after all. If an answer does not make sense to you, or if it seemingly contradicts what you believe you know about sealing, please don't argue with me. I'm happy to clear up any misconceptions or misunderstandings that you might have, but as a master, I will not argue with an apprentice who has nowhere near the level of knowledge and skill that I possess in this art. Do you have a problem with any of these ground rules? Not at all, responded Kurenai as she shook her head. I would expect similar behavior from anyone apprenticing under me in genjutsu. Well, good, then. Naruto replied with some enthusiasm, now that that's out of the way, let's get started, shall we? Naruto went on to explain to Kurenai exactly what fuinjutsu was, as well as give her some of the fundamental ideas and terms that most modern-day fuinjutsu experts used. He would have said fuinjutsu masters as well, but at present, there was one known living fuinjutsu master in all of the elemental nations, and his name happened to be Naruto Namikaze. By the time he was finished with his lecture on basic fuinjutsu, he started Kurenai on some basic calligraphy and seal drawing exercises. She began to object at first before Naruto reminded her of the ground rules, at which she promptly complied without further complaint. Of course, after comparing her seal drawing to Naruto's own, she could see where he had adequate cause for making her perform this exercise. This is how it went for the rest of the week. 4 hours of physical training in taijutsu, followed by lunch, followed by 4 more hours of seal drawing practice until Naruto was satisfied. Kurenai found that Naruto wasn't kidding when he had said that he was a stingy perfectionist when it came to sealing. He criticized her work up and down, sometimes to the point of almost making her lose her cool, but the one saving grace she found about him was that not only did he point out her flaws, he took the time to offer help and advice on how to correct them. He also mentioned that with each day, the more she applied his advice, the better her seal painting skills became, although they were still not to Naruto's standard, which she would continue to find annoying, but as an apprentice to her master, she kept her peace and continued the painstaking work of perfecting her seal writing and painting technique. Around day 4, Kurenai was also starting to add chakra into her muscles as she performed her exercises, and into the points of her hands and feet that made contact when she threw punches and kicks. In addition to the exercises getting easier, she did notice that her chakra reserves were getting noticeably larger, and her chakra control was getting better at the same time. She was finally starting to overcome her plateau. Naruto also helped Kurenai to blend several different taijutsu moves into a style that would work to her strengths. Fast blows and counterblows where she could add power when needed, but most of which involved quick movements, relying on her not staying still for too long. Most of the moves and attacks of her new style were circular in nature, as she seemed to prefer moving and attacking in arcs and curves as opposed to throwing strikes straight in. Naruto continued to help her build on this taijutsu style, actually finding himself excited about the time when they'd be adding ninjutsu or a weapon into this style of hers. At the end of the week, Naruto showed her his test plan for the genjutsu countering project. After looking it over, Kurenai approved of what she had seen, seeing that it was thorough enough to run a sufficient number of trials, and probably get enough feedback from it to know what, if any, additional tests would need to be included. They would begin running their first clinical trials in 2 days' time. And the genjutsu countering project is why I want to commission Kurenai's services. I want to make sure that she not only remains free to help me, but I want to continue training her as well, said Naruto, finishing his explanation to Tsunade. Well, so long as you can pay for the mission you're requesting, I have no objection. How long will you need her services for? Asked the blonde Hokage. 6 months minimum, maybe longer, depending on how this project goes. If I need more time, I can continue to pay for an extended A-rank mission at the rate you're currently charging. Tsunade's eyebrows shot up in shock at this. Brat, do you realize just how much an extended A-rank mission costs? You're talking the price of at least 6 S-rank missions due to the length of the mission alone. I realize that, Lady Hokage, and I can easily afford to pay that, added Naruto, very confident of the truth of his claim. Tsunade sighed in resignation, seeing that she was not going to talk him out of this. She began to put a mission profile together. Okay, Naruto. I'll fill out the paperwork with the mission details and I'll have Kurenai come up here to take the mission. Is there anything else? Naruto simply smiled. Nope, that's about it. Tsunade nodded before adding, I'll agree to this, because the money is needed by the village right now, but I have a condition. I want monthly progress reports from you on Kurenai's training, her apprenticeship under you, and the results of the genjutsu countering project as they all stand by the end of that month. Naruto nodded to her. No problem, Grandma Tsunade. I'll give you regular updates on all 3. With that, he dispelled himself before Suan could react, relaying the information back to Naruto. Naruto blinked as his clone relayed everything to him. Iruka saw him twitch and space out for a moment before coming back to himself. Shadow clone just dispel or something? He asked casually. Yeah, Naruto responded just as casually, although he was still shaking his head a little to try to sort through the sudden rush of information. Well, it looks like Grandma's allowing me to give Kurenai a mission so that I can keep her free for as long as I need her help, said Naruto, quite satisfied with Tsunade's approval of the request he sent his clone to make. Okay, Naruto. Well, I'm glad that things seem to really be coming along for you, said Iruka as he prepared to pay his bill and head back home to his wife. Sure thing, Iruka-sensei. I'm glad we could catch up, he responded as he paid his own bill, preparing to head back to his own home to do some training of his own. Both men said goodbye to each other and went their separate ways. And that's where we are now. Kurenai finished her recollection of the past week's events to Anko as they finished their meal. Anko, of course, couldn't help but continue to try to tease her friend some more. With a mischievous glint in her eye, and an equally mischievous smirk, she began to do just that. You've spent probably more time at Naruto's house in the past week than anyone else has. Well, ever, she looked dead at Kurenai in mock accusation. Kurenai blushed under Anko's scrutiny, beginning to sputter before collecting her faculties enough to spit out a defense. Now, wait a minute, it's nothing like that. I wouldn't be able to make a relationship with him work. He's just a little more than half my age. And I don't know him that well, yet. Anko fell out of her chair in laughter at this, clutching her sides and rolling on the floor, completely uncaring towards the scene she was making in the dango pit. Kurenai continued sputtering as her face kept getting redder and redder, both with embarrassment and anger at her friend for pushing her buttons like that and backing her into a corner. She eventually stopped sputtering and just sat there fuming as Anko pulled herself off the floor and back into her chair in an attempt to get a grip over her laughter. Anko wiped a few tears from her eyes. Hee, you should see the look on your face right now. Kurenai continued fuming as Anko continued to try to contain her laughter. Anko then continued, her tone playful, but with a hint of seriousness, but I never said anything about you and my little bro being in a relationship with each other. I may have teased a little. She paused, and both her face and tone softened as she continued, but if I were you, I'd ask myself a few things. Why did you feel the need to defend yourself like that? Also, why do you feel the need to even tell me why a relationship with anyone wouldn't work? It would seem to me, and I'm talking as your friend, now, Kurenai, that you might very well be developing feelings for him. Kurenai had calmed down as Anko's tone had softened. As she listened, she became a bit forlorn. She voiced her concerns, her own resigned frustration evident in her tone. I don't know what I feel right now, Anko. Up until last week, I wasn't feeling much of anything at all, and now, here I am, with all these new feelings that I have no idea what to do with. On the one hand, what I said is true, but on the other, it's pretty easy to forget that he's 14 years my junior given his maturity. But, I don't know, there's something about it all that just feels all wrong, she finished as her eyes began to well up. Anko dropped all pretenses of play and teasing as she frowned in concern for her friend. She paid their tab and quickly brought Kurenai out of the dango pit, teleporting the two of them to Kurenai's apartment. Kurenai looked at her friend in confusion. Anko answered the unspoken question, less chance of us being disturbed here. I don't think you'd want Iruka walking in on this kind of conversation, would you? Kurenai smiled in gratitude. No, I wouldn't. Well, come on in, she said as she pulled her keys out and unlocked her door. They entered her apartment and sat down on the loveseat next to each other. Anko began anew, placing her hand on Kurenai's knee. Kurenai, why is this whole thing bothering you so much? Kurenai closed her eyes and sighed in an effort to calm herself before answering. Failing to calm herself, or to keep the tears from coming, she responded, to tell you the truth, Anko, I just don't know. I don't know what I'm feeling, or why. Whenever I think about Naruto, one minute I feel like I've found the single greatest treasure I could ever imagine finding, and the next, I feel as though I'm betraying the man I loved, and everything we had. She began to sob at this, immense feelings of guilt threatening to overwhelm her. Anko pulled Kurenai into a comforting hug, Kurenai grabbing Anko tightly as she continued crying. Kurenai continued through her sobs, I never imagined myself in this kind of a situation. You're right, Anko, I am developing feelings for him, but he's so much younger than me, what will people think of me? Would something like this destroy all the respect I've worked so hard to earn? Will this hurt my career? Will it hurt his? What if I forget all about Asuma? There's just so much that's uncertain in this. More sobs continued to pour out of Kurenai as Anko simply rubbed her back in an effort to soothe her, and I'm scared. I'm more scared than I've ever been in my life, and I don't know what to do. She continued to sob in Anko's sisterly embrace, having said her piece. Anko just continued to soothe her and try to calm her down. After a few minutes, Kurenai's sobs began to subside. Anko, sensing that Kurenai was calm enough to be able to process what she had to say, pulled out of the hug so she could look Kurenai in the eye. She began, Kurenai, I want you to think about this for a minute, and I want you to think hard, okay? Kurenai nodded, waiting for Anko to continue. She did. If Asuma could come back just to talk to you for 10 minutes, what do you think he'd say? Kurenai blinked a few times at this. She hadn't expected to be asked such a question, and she certainly wasn't prepared for it. She began to think about who Asuma was, and what he would want for her. Kurenai began to answer tentatively, I think that he would want me to be happy. I think that it would sadden him to see me this way. I think he'd want me to love again, and to pursue the dream we had, of building a family, with a man who would love me as much as he did. She smiled at this next thought, actually, he would probably hope that I could find someone who'd love me even more than he did. He was always like that, she finished with a soft laugh as a few more tears began to roll down her cheeks. Anko smiled. I think that's exactly what he would say, and just because you won't necessarily grieve Asuma's passing anymore, that doesn't mean you've forgotten him, or that you ever will. You know as well as I do that you'll never forget Asuma Sarutobi. But you do need to free yourself enough, if not to love, then at least to live. Kurenai, any man that you might eventually get involved with, whether it's Naruto or not, they're not going to replace Asuma. I can't speak for anyone else, but I can tell you that Naruto wouldn't want to replace him. Would you want to be Sakura or Hinata's replacement to him? Kurenai grimaced at his as she shook her head in response. Anko laughed at this as she continued, Kurenai, the point I'm making here, is that there's nothing wrong with what you're beginning to feel for Naruto. And there's nothing wrong with being scared, either. The situation is kind of unusual, but that doesn't mean that it can't become something amazing and wonderful. Believe me, as well as I know Naruto Namikaze, you could do a whole lot worse. And in my opinion, you'd be rather hard-pressed to do better. Kurenai smiled at Anko, feeling very reassured, and yet, thanks, Anko. I'm still a bit scared, but Anko smiled and continued to reassure her friend, Kurenai, there's no pressure for you to do anything right now. If you're unsure about what you want to do, put off doing anything until you are sure. This, whatever it is you and Naruto have right now, neither of you forced this at all, it just kind of fell into your laps. Let this take its course, at its own pace, and just enjoy the ride for now. If something more is meant to happen, well, life just has a way of making that clear, you know what I mean. Kurenai smiled and nodded, understanding exactly what she was saying. She hugged Anko, this time in gratitude. You're right, Anko. I don't have to do anything I'm not ready to do, Kurenai said, resolved that she at least knew she didn't have to make a decision one way or another right now. Anko broke the hug and stood up, preparing to leave. She gave Kurenai that playful grin that she knew all too well, my work here's done. What are friends for, after all? Kurenai rolled her eyes and giggled at her friend's antics, showing her out. As she shut the door, she went back to the love seat, and continued reading, Murder in the Hidden Mist, from where she left off. Who knew what the future might hold? She certainly didn't, and neither did anyone else, but at least she was no longer scared of taking action in one direction or another. For now, she was content to just tag along for the ride, glad that for now, she didn't have to do anything at all. Iruka Yumino was in the middle of cooking dinner for his wife and himself. He was looking forward to talking with Anko after his earlier conversation with Naruto. Knowing that Anko had lunch with Kurenai while he was with Naruto, and suspecting that the reason Anko had not returned home yet was likely because she was still with Kurenai, he could hazard a guess that tonight's dinner conversation would be rather fascinating. As he prepared their typical evening meal of beef and chicken stir-fry, he began to reflect back on what Naruto had told him at Ichiraku's earlier that afternoon. He was both happy and hopeful for his best friend and adoptive little brother. He'd been through so much in his life, already, and it was about time that something with this kind of potential came along. Naruto's experience in life was about as far from normal as one could get, and there wasn't anyone who could really relate to him as he was now. He was far and away the most powerful ninja in the world, no enemy or threat could touch him or even approach him. But still, Iruka saw the loneliness that came as a result of being a god among men the way Naruto was. He remembered his own loneliness from his academy days, just after his parents had been killed in the Kyuubi's attack. He remembered the mischief he used to cause, just so that people couldn't help but notice him. He remembered that he eventually got past the loneliness and found camaraderie in Mizuki, even if the camaraderie was supposedly falsified on Mizuki's part. The truth is that Iruka didn't buy that from Mizuki for a second. The man really had been his friend at one point, and both of them knew it. He remembered other comrades that had helped to end the loneliness as well, particularly when he worked under Kakashi Hatake in the ANBU. That was quite a wild ride, and he remembered their adventures in Kakashi's outfit very well. Then, of course, when old man Sarutobi had asked Iruka to teach at the academy, and more specifically, to teach 8-year-old Naruto Uzumaki at the academy, his life would forever change in ways he couldn't even begin to fathom. He remembered how cold he was to Naruto at first, being unable to see past the Kyuubi who had killed his parents and traumatized him as a boy. Some people treated Naruto as though he wasn't even there, which was painful enough for him. Iruka had to admit, more to himself than to anyone else, that he had done even worse than that at first. He had treated Naruto as though he was there, but that he wished that he wasn't. Iruka still remembered the day after Naruto had decided that he'd had enough with the cold glares and with having to work so hard to prove to people that, in Naruto's own words, he wasn't a nuisance, and he wasn't some kind of germ, and that he had a name of his own. That name was Naruto Uzumaki. Looking back, Iruka couldn't ever remember feeling more guilty and ashamed of himself than when Naruto had said that to him. That was exactly how he had treated him, despite knowing that Naruto wasn't to blame for his loss. It was that night, for the first time, that Iruka really paid attention, and saw that look of loneliness in Naruto's eyes that he once saw when he used to look in the mirror. Iruka could see, however, that Naruto's loneliness was much more intense than his own ever was, and caused him much deeper pain. That was the night that Naruto had decided that he wouldn't attend his classes anymore. It was at this point where Iruka, in an effort to try to look more objectively at the boy that was his student, started to come by his house, seeing how he lived, and imagining the kinds of things he had to go through from day to day. His feelings of guilt and shame grew when he saw Naruto's living conditions. Naruto had nobody to teach him how to care for himself, or how to eat right, or how to survive from day to day, or even anyone to come home to after he'd had a particularly bad day to reassure him that everything would be okay. It was that same day that one of the boys in his class, what was his name, again, Hibachi? Yeah, that's right, he thought as he recalled the incident. Anyway, Hibachi had sent Naruto out on a wild goose chase as a joke in an effort to get him back for a prank that Naruto had pulled on him and his friends. The problem was that the joke was a very dangerous one. Iruka found himself getting angry about it even now. There had been some battles between Konoha ninja and ninja from some other village out in the back hills. Hibachi had said that if Naruto could get something from one of the corpses out there and bring it back, that Naruto could be friends with him and his buddies. Fortunately, Shikamaru and Choji had heard the group telling this to Naruto, essentially preying on his loneliness just to get a laugh out of him, a laugh for them that had nearly cost Naruto his life. Iruka had gone into the area that Naruto had been sent into by Hibachi and crew, and when he had finally found Naruto, he couldn't convince him to come back, nor could he convince him of the danger that he was in by being in an area that was likely still a battlefield. He remembered when Naruto was injured and knocked unconscious as he was being pursued by 3 enemy kunoichi, and how he had brought him back to the village, and Iruka himself probably wouldn't have made it if Kakashi hadn't followed him out and covered his retreat. Naruto and Iruka became not only teacher and student, but friends, and brothers in all but blood that day. Hibachi and his friends had been promptly expelled from the academy shortly after putting Naruto's life in danger so irresponsibly. Come to think of it, Iruka didn't ever recall seeing any of them again after that, even around the village. Oh well. Thinking about the relationship that he had forged with Naruto, and the way in which it continued to strengthen and deepen over the years brought a smile to the scar-nosed Chunin's face, and a tear to his eye. Naruto's loneliness had never left him as long as Iruka had known him. The reasons for it changed, certainly, but it was still there. As the village pariah, he was lonely. As the village idiot, he was lonely. As the village hero, he's still lonely. Being a scapegoat, or being someone truly great, 2 extremes on both ends of the spectrum of normalcy, both bring isolation. Naruto had nobody that could understand him, and besides a very select few, there were none that were willing to try, and then Kurenai seemed to come along in a chance encounter. 2 people who, at first glance, had seemingly nothing in common, but if one were to look a little more closely, they would see that the things they did have in common, few though they were the things that truly mattered. Both knew deep loss and pain. Both know what it was to lose comrades, both to death and to differences in life. Most importantly, though, both of them knew how it felt to be isolated and labeled, whether for good or ill. Kurenai Yuhi, whose physical beauty coupled with her skill in genjutsu made her stand out among the populace of the Hidden Leaf, as well as bringing a lot of attention of the unwanted variety from most of the male populace of Konoha. Even at 34 years of age, she was still the most desired woman in Konoha by men, and aside from the Hokage, the most admired and envied women in Konoha by women, both ninja and civilian alike. Possessing a beauty, poise and natural grace that had only improved with time, he hadn't appeared to age at all in the last 15 years or so that Iruka had known her, except if one were to look into her eyes, where they would see a maturity that reflected years of experience. It was this thought that made his thoughts turn to Naruto, whose eyes held a similar maturity to Kurenai's, a maturity that cost him quite a lot to attain. Naruto Uzumaki, Namikaze, he added in his own mind. He'd never get used to that, given the moniker Konoha's perfect storm, first on the battlefield, and then in bingo book pages in every shinobi nation, assigned a SS ranking in all of them. His father only received this rank in Iwa's bingo book. Named the perfect storm for his ability to unleash untold amount of destruction on untold number of people, using untold amounts of techniques at untold levels of skill. The word, untold, became annoying after a while, but this is what his bingo book page said. Naruto stood out and became the center of attention almost anywhere he went. Naruto himself was isolated first because of his burden, and later because he had become a god among men with power and ability so far beyond anyone that Iruka knew, that it became hard for most to see him as a man who was as human as anyone else, and had just as many frailties. Of course it didn't help that Naruto had problems with unwanted attention himself. The irony about Naruto and Kurenai potentially finding each other wasn't lost on Iruka at all. Kurenai, trying to make herself seem less human than people thought her to be in order to earn the respect of her colleagues and show her mettle as a kunoichi. Naruto, trying to show that he was more human than people thought him to be due to his exploits and accomplishments. Maybe the two of them could balance each other out, or something. Brought out of his reflections by the sound of his front door opening, he turned to see his wife, Anko Mitarashi Yumino, enter the house. Hi, honey. She greeted him with a warm smile. Hi, yourself. He greeted in response, and how was your lunch with Kurenai? We had a great time catching up. And let me tell you, she had a lot to share. Uruka responded in a knowing tone, I'm sure she did. I'll give you a wild guess as to who I ran into while you were with Kurenai. Anko didn't even need time to think about that one. You ran into Naruto, didn't you? Uruka nodded, and Naruto had a few interesting tidbits of his own to share. Anko raised an eyebrow at this. Did he, now? So I'm guessing that you know of what happened on the 4th and also what's been happening with them in the week since then. Uruka once again nodded. Yeah, Naruto filled me in. I actually wanted to talk to you about some of the things that Naruto told me. Anko gave a knowing nod as she responded, I wanted to talk to you as well. I think we should compare notes and see what we have on them. If we're both on the same page, and I suspect we are, then we might be able to help them out some. Uruka smiled mischievously at his wife. It's fun to meddle in family's business, isn't it? Anko gave a closed-eye grin and nodded before changing the subject. So, is dinner ready, yet? Uruka went wide-eyed, having forgotten to monitor what he was cooking. He ran back in to check it, and fortunately, it hadn't started to burn. Seeing that it was done, he prepared 2 plates and brought them over to the table, noting that Anko had already sat down. Anko had already set up sake and water for them to enjoy while they ate. Uruka set the plates in their places on the dining room table and sat down at the place where he set his own plate. After they gave a quick blessing, they began to eat while sipping on their sake. Anko began their conversation as they ate. So, Naruto and Kurenai, they've been in close proximity, haven't they? Uruka responded, yeah, Naruto's beginning to develop very strong feelings for her. I don't even think he knows just how strong they are, yet. Kurenai's got it just as bad. Uruka raised both eyebrows and smiled at this. His face became serious after a few moments. Did Kurenai express any reservations to you about how she felt? Because Naruto has a few. Anko frowned at this as she responded, yeah, Kurenai expressed some of her own. I told her that she didn't have to do anything in one direction or another right now, and that she should feel free to take it as slow as she needs to. That's what we told Naruto as well. Anko raised an eyebrow at this, tensing slightly. We. Oh, me, and Chuki and Ayame Ichiraku. Anko nodded in understanding and relaxed, knowing the confidence that Naruto and Uruka placed in the father-daughter ramen duo. So, what were Naruto's reservations about it? Well, he was worried about not being good enough for her. He mentioned the age gap, and about how he might not have anything to offer her that she would want in a partner. He's also worried about somehow hurting her inadvertently and driving her away because of his past experiences with women. He doesn't understand what Kurenai might see in him or why. Anko nodded once again. It's a good thing he has us to tell him, then. Kurenai's reservations were a bit different. The age gap is an issue for her as well, but it's because she's more worried about losing the respect that she's earned over the years if people were to start thinking of her as a cradle robber. She's worried about how it might affect her career, and she's also worried about how it might affect Naruto's chances at being Hokage. There's also another, more sensitive issue for her. She's afraid of forgetting Asuma, because the more she's around Naruto, the less she feels Asuma's absence. Uruka, all of these things frighten her. She wants to pursue him, I think, and, honestly, the more I think about it, the more I'd love to see the two of them together, but she's so mixed up right now that I don't think she could have a healthy relationship with anyone until she works all of this out. Uruka nodded in understanding. Yeah, and it's not like she doesn't have valid concerns, either. It could affect her career, or at least it could cause her to lose respect. You know how people in this village are, at times. I mean, I can tell you for a fact that Naruto won't care what people will think about his relationships, he knows whose opinions really matter and whose don't. And he'll be Hokage anyway, simply because he's the only one who can do the job that will. But then there is also the whole Asuma issue that she needs to move past. He paused and thought at this as it came to him. No, it's not that she needs to move past it, it's that she needs to want to move past it. Anko's eyes lit up in understanding. She knew right away that Iruka was onto something. She voiced her thoughts on the matter. Yeah, that's exactly it, and as her thoughts trailed off, her eyes narrowed slyly as she continued. You know, even though we've told them to just let whatever happens happen, who's to say we can't, maybe, I dunno, help them along a little. Iruka, feeling like a prankster for the first time since his academy days, gave a sly smirk all his own. I like the way you think, honey. Yeah, let's do that. And with that, the Yuminos began to scheme and devise plans to bring Naruto and Kurenai into a loving relationship as a couple while thinking of ways to keep their machinations under the radar so that Naruto and Kurenai would continue to follow their advice. The following morning found Kurenai receiving a summons to the Hokage's office via Anbu just before she was set to head over to Naruto's place for their training. While she would normally be grateful for this, knowing that it meant a mission, she now had mixed feelings. On the one hand, she was glad to be able to do something to bring in a little money, but on the other, it would take away from training time with Naruto, something she was really beginning to enjoy the benefits of undergoing, gaining greater control over her chakra, increasing her reserves, getting faster and stronger, becoming a better fighter, learning about seals and many other new skills, eating Naruto's cooking and spending time with him. Whoa, wait a minute, there, girl, slow down and let that part work itself out, she reminded herself, as she heeded Anko's advice about not forcing herself or taking hasty action in either direction on that front. After making a few final adjustments to her appearance and making sure that all her gear was fastened and in place, she teleported in a swirl of leaves to the Hokage Tower. She appeared just outside the entrance to the upper levels and entered, getting Shizune's attention by wishing her a good morning. Shizune, upon seeing that Kurenai had arrived, simply told her that she could go ahead and go on in to see Tsunade. Kurenai thanked her and knocked on Tsunade's door. Enter, was the command she heard from the Hokage. She grabbed the door handle on the left door of the double doors that served as the entry point into the Hokage's office and pulled the door open. Upon entering, she announced herself in a professional manner, Junin Kurenai Yuhi reporting as ordered, milady. It was as she did this that she noticed Naruto in the office as well. While he could frequently be found here, Kurenai knew that he should be at his home, expecting her to show up any minute. She simply raised an eyebrow at this, wondering if maybe a mission had come up that would require the two of them to work together. This random thought both excited her and made her a little uneasy at the same time. Tsunade brought Kurenai's attention to herself as she began to brief the red-eyed Junin. Good morning, Kurenai. I've summoned you here because your services have been requested specifically for an A-rank mission. Kurenai's eyes widened at this. A-rank missions these days were practically unheard of, and it would be foolish at best to turn one down. She glanced over at Naruto, who smiled knowingly in response, before bringing her gaze back to Tsunade. The busty blonde continued, to let you know, the reason Naruto is here is because it is Naruto who has contracted your services. Kurenai adopted a confused frown whilst raising an eyebrow at Naruto, wondering what exactly he was up to. Tsunade continued her briefing. This is an extended A-rank mission that has a minimum duration of 6 months, and is open to renegotiation if a greater length of time is required. During this time, you will receive monthly compensation for the duration of this mission, at extended A-rank mission pay. Kurenai smiled at this, the news having made her day already. Tsunade, noticing this, leaned forward, propping her elbows on her desk and intertwining the fingers of both her hands together, resting her chin on the bridge that her interlaced fingers provided. Smirking, she continued, Naruto has told me about his genjutsu countering project. He also tells me that he's ready to begin initial clinical trials starting today. In order for his project to be completed in a timely manner, he has commissioned your services so that you can assist him in any way that he requires. This will also keep you free from other missions for that time, so that not only can you assist him with this, she paused as she allowed her smirk to grow wider before finishing, but you can also continue training under him. He's informed me of your apprenticeship to him in the art of Fuinjutsu, and as we currently only have one seal master in the village right now, any apprentices that he can take on to learn the art would be a great boon to the village and would enable us to greatly enhance the selection and variety of services that we can offer potential clientele. He's also informed me that he's helping you to solve a little problem that you've encountered, something about chakra control and reserves, and not being able to increase one without losing ground in the other. Kurenai's smile had grown wider and wider as Tsunade informed her of her mission, and of what she knew about her apprenticeship and training. She nodded and responded to the Hokage's implied question, "Yes, that's right, milady. Naruto has been kind enough to spend a lot of time helping me to diversify the ways in which I use chakra. In the last week, I've already broken through the ceiling that I was at before. Both my reserves and control have increased already, and I have to admit I'm excited about what the future holds for my skills as a ninja if Naruto is able to help me keep progressing at the rate we are." Tsunade nodded in approval at this. Excellent. Tsunade's smile dropped as she adopted a more professional demeanor. "I've told Naruto that I have two conditions concerning your apprenticeship and training. The first is that he is to give me monthly status reports as to your progress. The second is that by the end of it, I expect you to provide a demonstration of your skills in an exhibition fight against some of our top ninja. Do you agree to these terms?" Kurenai nodded, schooling her features into a neutral expression, maintaining her professionalism before her commander-in-chief. "Yes, milady. I agree, and thank you," she added with a small smile. Tsunade smiled in response. "You're welcome, Kurenai. Truth be told, I'm looking forward to seeing what you'll learn under the brat, here." Kurenai turned her gaze to Naruto, who hadn't lost his grin. She smiled in return before turning her attention back to her Hokage. "Is there anything else, milady?" Tsunade shook her head. "No, you're dismissed. I believe the two of you have a project to get to." Naruto answered for the pair. "Yes, we do. Kurenai, shall we?" he asked as he extended an arm to her. Kurenai nodded and approached Naruto, leaning into him while he placed an arm around her, before both of them disappeared in a flash of yellow. Tsunade absently thought that they made a nice-looking pair before returning her attention to the bane of every cage's existence, paperwork. As soon as Naruto and Kurenai flashed into Naruto's front yard, he led her inside so that they could eat the breakfast that he had sealed away in order to keep it fresh and hot. After doing this, they went through the typical morning workout routine and ate lunch before getting to the clinical trials that Naruto had created. The test cases that he had designed, with himself as the primary test subject, were split into two separate test plans. The first one involved simply escaping genjutsu, the dispelling of genjutsu of levels from D rank ranging to S rank that attacked his individual senses, the dispelling of genjutsu of levels from D rank to S rank that attacked his mind, and the dispelling of area-wide genjutsu of levels from D rank to S rank that affected the perceptions of anyone who entered the area. The second, more advanced test plan involved the countering of genjutsu and sending them back at the caster, or even into another target, which involved the following test cases: the countering and redirection of genjutsu of levels from D rank ranging to S rank that attacked his individual senses. The countering and redirection of genjutsu of levels from D rank to S rank that attacked his mind, and Naruto had decided to put these test cases under this test plan, as the basic purpose of them was the same as the other two in his mind: the blocking of area-wide genjutsu of levels from D rank to S rank from his individual perceptions without actually dispelling the genjutsu across the area, fooling the enemy into thinking that he was still in the genjutsu. The field tests would run the same test cases, but the main difference would be the controlled conditions of the clinical trials versus the real-world conditions of the field tests. The field tests would simulate conditions that would be encountered on any mission, such as ninja speed travel, and even combat conditions. The clinical trials involved Naruto being very still, beginning in a meditative state. As he meditated and concentrated on sensing the flow of his chakra, he signaled for Kurenai to hit him with a D-rank genjutsu that would attack one of his senses. She chose his sense of hearing. Naruto was able to sense the foreign chakra well enough, and he was able to forcibly expel it from his system very quickly, almost before it could even take hold. Both were pleasantly surprised at the success of the first clinical test. Naruto's theory about being able to sense a foreign chakra signature and purge it from his coils had been spot on, and it was just shown to be a much faster method for dispelling genjutsu than the standard chakra flooding or stopping of overall chakra flow, not to mention it was far less unpleasant than using extreme physical pain. As the day went on, though, Naruto found that expelling chakra in such a manner was simple enough for genjutsu that attacked the senses, even though he had to concentrate more and more on the complexities and subtleties of how chakra was sent into him with higher-ranking genjutsu. Kurenai decided to spontaneously add a couple of test cases that Naruto had left out of his test plan: multi-layered genjutsu that both attacked more than one of his senses in layers, as well as multi-layered genjutsu in which one or more of the layers attacked the same sensory perception. This little aside had enabled Naruto to discover something, and essentially invent another new skill that he dubbed chakra flow identification, in which he was able to, by the feel of the chakra sent at him, determine almost exactly what the chakra was molded to do. He was able to dispel even S-rank genjutsu sent at him in such a manner, though this took a little longer while adding the bonus of furthering his chakra flow identification skills. The more complex the genjutsu, the more refined the chakra had to be molded and sent in such ways as to have multiple different effects. But while chakra from genjutsu that attacked his senses was easy enough for him to deal with, chakra from genjutsu that attacked his mind and his mental perceptions was not. While he could identify the foreign chakra, it behaved differently, to such a degree that he wasn't exactly sure what to do with it. The more he and Kurenai tried to figure out a solution to this problem, the more frustrated they became, as nothing they could do seemed to work. Naruto eventually decided that they had accomplished enough for one day, with Kurenai suggesting that maybe stepping back from the problem might offer a solution. They both went inside and had dinner that was prepared by a shadow clone, talking about the successful trials that were run, and the new skills that this could introduce to their own shinobi. If Naruto, who was naturally weak to genjutsu due to his inhuman reserves of chakra, could dispel genjutsu in such a way, then any shinobi could learn to. The pair both found themselves feeling very satisfied with the results of the first set of tests. They then began to brainstorm as to how they might be able to solve the problem that Naruto had encountered with genjutsu that attacked his mind. Naruto told Kurenai about how the chakra just felt different. With the sensory attacks, it was almost as though the chakra, even with the subtleties, was solid, for lack of a better word, and he could essentially latch his own chakra onto it, forcing it out of him. The chakra that attacked his mind behaved more like air. It just seemed to float around, and as he tried to latch onto it, it just seemed moved around and out of his grasp, leaving him with nothing to grab. In a sudden moment of inspiration, Kurenai asked Naruto, "What if you were able to see the chakra instead of just feeling it?" Naruto, in confusion, raised an eyebrow at her. "What do you mean?" "Well, what if we were to enlist the help of a Hyuga with this little project? Someone who can see exactly how the chakra is flowing through the coils and how it's behaving. It could provide some insight and help us solve this little problem," Kurenai said, in a hopeful tone. Naruto gave a thoughtful frown, which turned into a thoughtful smirk as he responded, "Yeah, I think that would work. I'll talk to Grandma tomorrow and see if I can't get Neji on board for this. He's got the most fine-tuned Byakugan that I know of, and he'll probably be able to see the problem more clearly than any other Hyuga." Kurenai smiled at his renewed enthusiasm for the project, nodding in agreement with him. God willing, Neji Hyuga would become a part of this project, and would be able to help them tremendously with his ability to literally see chakra. She was just as excited as Naruto was to see the end result of this project. Even though she hadn't been present at the project's inception, she had now made it her own, and it was as much her own undertaking as it was Naruto's. Knowing that little more could be done about it now, they both focused on other topics of discussion, most of which didn't relate to their training or ninja arts. Kurenai would tell him about the latest mystery she was reading, or the basic goings-on in her day-to-day life, and Naruto actually began to open up to her a little bit about what Jiraiya had taught him about income apart from his shinobi career, and his own business ventures and investments that he had built and acquired as a result. Kurenai was floored when she learned that Naruto's assets and income made him one of the world's wealthiest individuals. He had a higher net worth than even Gato had in his heyday. His assets and businesses were also very widespread, with at least one business or revenue stream in every nation on the elemental continent, whether major or minor. She now realized exactly why he needed an office as big as his was to handle his life money matters. Her curiosity piqued. She posed a question: so how exactly do you handle running all of these businesses if they're so widespread? Naruto answered, oh, I don't directly run them all. I have regional managers and vice presidents who do all that for me. I meet with them regularly to discuss what's going on with each business, and if I need to, I'll head down to one of them myself and make an appearance, or I can send a shadow clone to do it. I've placed Hiraishin arrays in all of them, though, so I can get there without the hassle of the travel time, especially now that you and I are doing all the work we're doing here. Kurenai nodded with raised eyebrows and a smile, clearly impressed by how he handled his affairs. He continued explaining about his businesses, many of which she was familiar with, but until now had no idea that Naruto was the owner of them. Businesses such as the Daimyo's Palace, resorts that had sprung up all across the continent that served as getaways for high power and high profile people, as well as convention centers for various functions. Or the chain of high class restaurants known as the Dragon and Phoenix, each one specializing in high-quality cuisine from its native land or locale, as well as dishes that Naruto knew of from the destroyed Uzu no Kuni and Uzushiogakure, most of which could not be prepared or ordered anywhere else. Despite the rapt attention she was giving to what he was telling her, she found herself studying the man sitting next to her at his dining room table, a wistful, faraway smile adorning her face. She noticed the excitement that he had for his ventures, and the fondness with which he spoke of the pervy sage. She found the love and fondness that he had for those precious to him very warming to her heart and soul, but this led to her noticing that when he spoke of them, that glint of isolation appeared in his eyes once more. She didn't know how she could tell, but she saw that it was there. She found that the more she got to know him, the more she began to develop certain gut instincts about what he was thinking and feeling. She chose the moment he stopped talking to see if she could peel back a few more layers of Naruto's soul. You miss him, still, don't you? Asked Kurenai sadly, an empathizing frown spreading across her features. Naruto stared at her expressionlessly for a few moments as he tried to recollect his faculties and recover from his surprise. He then pursed his lips together in a tight line, closed his eyes, and sighed, hanging his head just a tad. Finally, he nodded in answer to her question. He added, terribly. I never knew my father, but the pervy sage was the closest thing I had to one. He smiled, both with happiness and profound sadness, as so many of the good times that he remembered with the man came back to him. Kurenai's own eyes narrowed in surprise at his admission. She knew that Naruto was very fond of the man, but she had no idea that Naruto saw him as a father figure. Naruto smiled and brought his gaze back up, looking Kurenai in the eye. With this, he began to open up a bit more. You know, I remember the first time that I really thought about him like that. It was when we were out searching for Grandma Tsunade to bring her back here so she could be Hokage. He was also teaching me the Rasengan while we were on the road. But I remember that we stopped in Atofika town. There was a festival going on, and while Pervy Sage went to try to find some information so we could pick up Grandma's trail, he left me to just enjoy myself at the festival. So I did that. Played a few carnival games, ordered a bunch of festival food from the vendors there. Naruto's smile became a bit wistful yet sad at the same time. On my way to the field outside of town where we'd agreed to meet back up, I saw a father and his son. They were sharing a 2-stick frozen popsicle. He noticed that Kurenai smiled warmly at the sweetness of that image, and I just walked away feeling so dejected. It wasn't the first time I felt that way, but it was the first time that someone helped me with it. I decided to get back to training my Rasengan when Pervy Sage showed up. Funny enough, he had one of those 2-stick popsicles. His voice softened as he finished, and he shared half of it with me. Kurenai gasped softly at this, the implication of what this had meant to Naruto at the time not being lost on her. She couldn't help but feel a bit happy for Naruto at the moment, finally knowing what it must have felt like to have a father of sorts. She also, to her surprise, found herself feeling a sentiment that she never imagined she would feel towards Jiraiya, fondness and gratitude, for giving Naruto even a small taste of what it felt like to be treasured and valued by a parent. Her thoughts wandered to what kind of a father Naruto himself might be, knowing how precious it is for a child to feel loved by his parents, and knowing what it's like to not have that. This line of thinking, of course, brought up certain other feelings that Kurenai still wasn't ready to explore just yet, so she shifted her attention back to Naruto's story. Naruto continued, "We had a few more moments like that, where he'd share a popsicle with me. You know, it's funny, when I heard that he had been killed, I didn't know what to feel or what to do. I remember raging at Tsunade for sending him over to Omegakure to find out more about Akatsuki, and Naruto sighed sadly as he remembered being unduly cruel to Tsunade when she told him about Jiraiya's death. I blamed her for it. I yelled at her at the top of my lungs, in front of God and everybody, that it was her fault that he was dead." Kurenai sat there, fixed in silence as her face fell. Naruto continued, I was so cruel to her that day, and so many of the things I said just weren't fair. She just sat there, and let me yell at her. Even in front of the entire Konoha 11, and Kakashi, Guy and Yamato, she didn't stop me. She didn't try to remind me of my place. She just let me yell at her, and she didn't react at all. After I left the office, I could remember Sakura saying that she was going to give me a piece of her mind, but Tsunade told her that it was okay, and she understood where I was coming from. I ran into Iruka as I was walking out of the tower. He invited me to get some ramen, and I was so shaken up by what I'd just been told that I actually turned him down. He couldn't help but chuckle at the irony of that moment. Kurenai's eyebrows shot up in surprise as she gaped at him. His ramen addiction was legendary. To imagine him turning down free ramen was just impossible. Naruto stopped chuckling after a few moments and continued with his tale. I was walking home, and I passed a convenience store. I thought of all the times Pervy Sage shared a popsicle with me, so I went inside and bought one. Then I went to one of the benches that lined the roadway to the main gate, and I just sat there, not eating the popsicle, just lost in grief. That's when Iruka found me again after hearing about Pervy Sage's death. He just tried to help me as best he could, and he and I shared that popsicle. You know, it's funny, now that I think about it, but I haven't had another one since. Kurenai visibly saddened at this. She remembered certain moments that she had treasured with her own father before he had been killed in Kyuubi's attack. She remembered that she used to love cake, because like Naruto and Jiraiya with popsicles, Kurenai and her own father had a thing for cupcakes. She hadn't touched cake herself since that fateful day. It reminded her too much of moments that she could never have with her father again, much the same as popsicles would do for Naruto with respect to Jiraiya. Naruto finished. I do miss Jiraiya. He paused and then chuckled at the irony that he saw behind what he just said. You know, I've hardly ever referred to the man by his name, and it still feels kind of foreign to me to use it, even as well as I knew him. He was the first person to not only really know me, but he was the first person to really understand me as well. Kurenai nodded with a new understanding for the man in front of her. Feeling bold, she asked in a compassionate tone, "Is that why you seem so lonely most of the time?" Naruto simply smiled at her astuteness and nodded, "Yeah, that's a big part of it. It's funny how you can still be lonely while surrounded by people, isn't it?" Kurenai smiled back at him, "Yes, it is. And I do know how that feels, as well. The loneliness, I mean. Honestly, I can't tell you how many people have told me how lucky I am to have the physical beauty that I possess, but what they don't know is that it's been very hard for me to earn the respect of my colleagues and peers, and be taken seriously as a ninja, all because I possess a certain combination of features that make me very, aesthetically pleasing. I've had to work harder than most other kunoichi to show that I'm not just a pretty face or slab of meat, and knowing that so many will see me as little more than that, makes it rather lonely for me as well. So I do know what it's like for so many people to not understand you, or even bother to really try to get to know you, thinking they've already got you figured out." As she finished, she closed her eyes and let out a sad sigh. Naruto gave a small, yet reassuring smile. "Kurenai, if it helps, I don't see you that way. I won't deny the truth behind your claims concerning your physical attributes," he said while treading very carefully, making sure that he wasn't giving her the wrong idea, "but I primarily see a woman who has worked very hard to build a career that she can be proud of, and who should be taken very seriously, as you have attained the rank of elite Junin. I also see a woman who is, if you'll allow me, as smart and as strong of character as she is beautiful. And a woman that I'm proud to work with, train, and over the last week, call my friend." Kurenai had almost been moved to tears by what he had just said to her. Nobody had ever talked to her like that and been so genuine in their sentiments, not even Asuma. It wasn't that Asuma didn't feel that way, it was just that he didn't have the same way with words that Naruto did. What had also moved her to such a degree was that Naruto was coming to really know her, just as she was coming to really know him. Naruto just had a sense of the kind of praise or compliments that she would appreciate or value, and he did just that. "Naruto, thank you," she began in a tone belying the sincerity of her gratitude, "that mean a lot, especially coming from someone whose opinions I am starting to greatly value." She smiled at him, pausing to bring her thoughts back to something he had mentioned a few moments ago. "You said that missing Jiraiya was a big part of why you feel as lonely as you do. If you don't mind me asking, what else makes you feel that way?" Naruto smiled at her reassuringly, sensing her slight nervousness at possibly broaching a sore subject. "I don't mind you asking the least little bit. There are a couple of other things to it. One is that I'm as strong and as skilled as I am, and people tend to stick me on this pedestal for that. I know that's just something I'm not going to be able to do a whole lot about. All I can really do is live with it. Secondly, I'm not really sure what it is, but I just feel as though something's missing from my life. I thought it was a romantic partner at first, but even when I was with Hinata, that missing feeling didn't go away. I didn't feel it as strongly, certainly, but it was still there, and I'm not exactly sure what it is." Kurenai frowned in thought at this. It was almost as though she could identify what it might be for him that was causing that feeling, but it just wasn't coming to her. After a few moments of pondering, she decided to note it and keep it in the back of her mind for now. It would probably come to her later, and it wouldn't really do to spend too much time dwelling on it at this moment in time. Kurenai decided to open up a little bit more to Naruto in reciprocation for what he had shared with her. "Naruto, do you remember how I told you that I didn't like cake?" Naruto nodded, a confused frown spreading across his features as he wondered where she was going with this. Kurenai continued, "Well, cake with me is very similar to popsicles for you." Naruto's frown changed from a confused one to an intrigued one. "Really?" Kurenai nodded and began her own tale. "You see, when I was younger, my father and I used to go to that little bakery and cafe that used to be on Central Square before Pain destroyed the village. It was a shame that the baker didn't make it out. I never did learn his name. Anyway, whenever I did something that Dad thought was worthy of reward, he always took me to that bakery, and we would order a dozen cupcakes. We'd get 2 of a flavor in 6 different flavors, and we always switched up the flavors whenever we went there, and then we'd both have 1 of each of the flavors we picked out. The last time we did that was when I had just been promoted to Chunin. That was 6 months before the Kyuubi attacked. Dad died defending the village. He was actually reported to have played a critical role in delaying and distracting the Kyuubi long enough for those of us who were evacuating the civilians to get them to the safe houses, and also in keeping the Kyuubi busy long enough for the 4th Hokage to arrive and to do what he needed to do to seal it into you. Kurenai smiled nostalgically as she remembered her father. I've always been proud of my father. He was a courageous man, and a great dad, too. I always feel especially proud when I remember what he did that night and how he died wanting to protect all of us. But, whenever I would pass by that bakery, or whenever I would smell any kind of cake, it would bring me back to those times that I would never be able to have with him again. I haven't eaten so much as a crumb of any kind of cake ever since then, not even on my birthday. Naruto nodded and sighed, understanding exactly what she was feeling. Kurenai commented, a wry, thoughtful expression adorning her face. It's funny, now that I think about it, I've never told anyone that before. I've never really thought to until now. Naruto simply smiled at her. Thank you. Kurenai, confused, asked, for what? Naruto responded, for sharing something so personal with me, and just for talking to me like a real person. It's an uncommon experience for me. Kurenai simply nodded with a smile, and responded in kind, well, I should thank you for the same reason, then. I may not have the problem to the same degree that you do, but I know what it's like to be given a certain image or label. That's part of where the Ice Queen persona came from, believe it or not. I got so fed up with being labeled for my looks or for being a woman, that I decided if I was going to be labeled, then I could at least be the one to decide what label I was given. It's why I started acting coldly towards people who didn't know me well. Naruto nodded, remembering a few interactions he'd had with the woman when he was a young genin, and how she had taken a rather aloof tone and posture with him. Naruto asked, so is this how you usually are when you let your hair down around friends? Kurenai answered the question in a bemused fashion, actually, yes and no. Yes, I usually feel free to lighten up around my friends like this. But at the same time, I don't let my guard down this much around anyone else except Anko. This brought a smile to Naruto's face, touching him that she would feel safe enough to let her guard down to such a degree. He felt the same way. Only a very select few had Naruto's trust enough to let his guard down to such a degree, and if he was honest with himself, that number of people was getting smaller and smaller, as he continued to become more comfortable with showing more and more of who he really was to this woman. As the conversation died down again, both of them found themselves blushing once more as they studied each other. Realizing the tension that was beginning to arise, Kurenai decided to change the subject. Well, it's still early enough to go talk to the Hokage. If you want to ask her about Neji, we may be able to get him here as early as tomorrow to work on our little issue. Naruto, thankful himself for the change in subject, nodded in agreement, standing up as he offered his hand to Kurenai. Good idea. Do you want me to go ahead and take you home, or would you like to come with me? Kurenai, taking his hand and standing up, answered, I'll go with you. After all, this is my project, too, you know, she added with a slight knowing smirk. Naruto chuckled at this. Yes, it is. Okay, then, next stop, Grandma's office. He brought her in closer to himself, trying not to blush as he remembered the tension that Kurenai had just attempted to dissolve, as he wrapped his arm around her and flashed them to the Hokage Tower. Normally, Tsunade's first apprentice Shizune, while not shy, was usually meek and reserved in the presence of her master. Normally, when Tsunade was angry, Shizune was terrified. Normally, when Tsunade told her to jump, Shizune would not only ask, how high, but also, in what direction, and, when should I stop? Normally, did not apply when it came to certain breaches of professionalism and protocol on Tsunade's part. Today was one of those days where things didn't go normally. The lack of normalcy left Tsunade a bit ill-tempered, which was made even worse because she knew that if she tried to make her anger known to Shizune right now, that Shizune would simply put Tsunade in her place, which was in the seat of the Hokage's chair, stone cold sober, and getting paperwork done. Shortly after Naruto and Kurenai had left this morning, Shizune walked into Tsunade's office only to find her drinking. Lady Tsunade, I have more papers that require your attention. Here they are. Shizune's words dropped off as she saw the sake bottle on Tsunade's desk, and the saucer in Tsunade's hand. Tsunade looked in Shizune's direction and, seeing that glare, that ironically enough, only Shizune could seem to give, that would make even men such as Orochimaru or Itachi Uchiha break out in a cold sweat, looked on in fear as Shizune stomped towards her, another huge stack of papers in her hands to be added to the 5 just as huge stacks that she had yet to work her way through. Shizune threw the stack on Tsunade's desk, the stack itself somehow remaining as orderly as if she had just gently laid it down, and walked around the desk, stopping in front of Tsunade, and leaning down until her furious glare was mere inches from Tsunade's terrified visage. Shizune began her rant, in a volume that no human being had any business being capable of even reaching, let alone forming comprehensible speech in. Tsunade Senju, how many times do we have to go over this? Shizune immediately continued in perfect cadence, her voice getting steadily louder with each word uttered. While you are behind this desk, you will not drink, you will not sleep, you will not punch people through walls, you will not in any way, shape, or form present yourself as anything less than a respectable ninja cage and village leader. What parts of this do you not seem to understand? Tsunade just shrank back into her chair with each word that Shizune belted out into her now sore ears in an effort to try to put a safe distance between herself and the object of her terror. Shizune, of course, didn't wait for an answer, as she knew Tsunade would give her none in this particular instance, just like she never had any other time this particular situation happened. While still huffing in fury at her master's terrible habits, she began to go through every nook and cranny in Tsunade's desk and office, removing every bottle of sake from its hiding place, and then from the office. Tsunade, of course, would come up with a new hiding place from time to time so as to have a bottle on hand strictly for emergencies, and Shizune quakes certainly qualified as emergencies in Tsunade's book. She had recently created a new hiding place in her office behind her own portrait, and had a high-quality bottle of sake hidden in there at this very moment. She allowed herself a small smirk, thinking she had pulled one over on Shizune, not that she would ever vocalize such a sentiment when Shizune was in this state. And just what do you think you're smirking about, asked Shizune, with renewed fury, this time of a much colder nature, terrifying Tsunade even more than Shizune's explosive anger. Shizune began to look around the office, allowing her sake, sixth sense, to tell her where any bottles she had missed might be. Stopping when she gazed at Tsunade's portrait, she stormed towards it, ignoring Tsunade's objections as she ripped the portrait from the wall and without looking, threw it back across the room and out the window, narrowly missing Tsunade's head in the process. Seeing the safe, Shizune grabbed the handle, and charging up chakra into her hand and arm, yanked the safe out of the wall, destroying said wall in the process. She turned around and informed Tsunade, "You will get these back at the end of the day when you are done with your paperwork." Shizune began to leave until she heard Tsunade start to grumble under her breath. At this, Shizune turned back around and walked back to where she had originally started yelling at Tsunade, and leaning in once more, she yelled in a tone that was just as loud as it was the first time, "If you have time to grump and whine, you have time to stamp and sign. Now get to work." Tsunade immediately shut up and starting reading and signing papers at a feverish pace. Shizune, satisfied that her work for the moment was done, left the office so that Tsunade would work in peace. Yes, today hadn't been a normal day for Tsunade in the least. It was made worse when Shizune decided to clear Tsunade's calendar for the day so that she could work without any interruptions whatsoever. In fact, the only interruptions that Shizune allowed Tsunade were lunch and dinner, which Shizune was kind enough to go out and get herself, along with some tea, water, and other non-alcoholic beverages, so that Tsunade didn't have to leave her desk for any reason except to maybe use the ladies' room. She sometimes hated having an apprentice that was so thoughtful. In the middle of her mental despair at the lack of interruptions throughout her day, she was, ironically enough, interrupted by a knock on her door. "Enter," she responded. The door opened, revealing Shizune with an all too innocent grin on her face. She announced, "Lady Tsunade, have you completed the paperwork for Naruto's Genjutsu countering project yet?" "No," Tsunade answered, her resigned displeasure evident in her answer. "Very well, then. Naruto and Kurenai are actually here to renegotiate the mission in light of certain findings during today's trials." Tsunade quickly looked up, thankful to be able to interact with any human being that was not Shizune. "Send them in," she ordered eagerly, causing Shizune to raise a confused eyebrow before acquiescing to her master's order. She opened the door a little wider, allowing entrance to the pair whose presence she had just announced. Naruto and Kurenai walked into the office, Shizune closing the door behind them. Naruto immediately noticed the gaping hole in the wall where he remembered Tsunade's portrait being, and raised a curious eyebrow in Tsunade's direction. Tsunade responded, "1. It wasn't me. 2. Don't ask." Naruto simply nodded, seeing that Tsunade did in fact look as though she was at the end of her rope. He opted to get straight to business. "We need to renegotiate the project." Tsunade narrowed her eyes, as though to say, "I'd better like what I hear, or you're not going to like what I do." After a few moments' pause, she asked in a suspicious and annoyed tone, "Why?" Naruto responded matter-of-factly, "I need to commission some additional help for this project, and I'm willing to pay extra to you for the inconvenience of having to renegotiate." "Well, at least it's good news," thought Tsunade, allowing herself a small smile as she asked, "So what kind of additional help do you need?" "Neji Hyuga," responded Naruto. Tsunade gave a thoughtful, yet confused frown in response to this. Naruto began to explain his reasoning, "I need someone who can see chakra, and how it flows and behaves in a person's coils. Neji's got the most fine-tuned Byakugan I know, and his help would be invaluable in this project." Tsunade, knowing Neji's situation, gave Naruto her answer. "Naruto, I'll agree to this request, but I'm going to have to charge you even more for Neji's services, because I will have to rescind his Anbu duties for the duration of the mission. And the only reason I am agreeing to this, is because Neji and Tenten Hyuga have a baby on the way." Naruto's eyes widened at this as he smiled while Tsunade continued, "And I have a feeling they could use the extra money. Do you have a problem with this?" Naruto, still smiling, shook his head, "No problem at all, Grandma. Just let me know what the additional charges will be and I'll deliver them all." Tsunade nodded, "Very well. Neji will be at your home in 2 days' time to help with the project. Don't be surprised if he brings Tenten with him. Neji's a bit paranoid about being at his wife's side at all times in case he needs to get her to the hospital, to the point where he's refused any duty beyond standard village patrol and Hokage guard duty. As a matter of fact, Falcon, an Anbu in a falcon's mask with flowing dark brown hair appeared between the Hokage and her 2 guests. Facing Tsunade, he dropped to one knee, bowing his head in salute to his commander-in-chief. "Falcon, remove your mask and reveal yourself to these 2 if you would, please," Tsunade responded while indicating Naruto and Kurenai to the Anbu. At this, Falcon immediately complied and turned around, facing Naruto and Kurenai. He removed his mask, revealing none other than Neji Hyuga, wearing his typical smirk. "Good evening, Naruto, Kurenai, it's been a while, hasn't it?" Both Naruto and Kurenai smiled at him. Naruto stepped forward and extended his hand in greeting. "It certainly has. How've you been?" Neji took Naruto's hand and shook it in a friendly handshake as he answered, "Quite good, actually. In spite of my clan's current troubles, my family life is good. Tenten, as Lady Tsunade has told you, is with child, she's 6 weeks along, we just found out a couple days ago." Naruto's eyebrows shot up at this. "Congratulations, Neji, I'm really excited for the two of you," he exclaimed as he patted his old friend on the shoulder with his free hand. Both men released the other's hand, while Naruto continued, "So, you've heard about the project, and what I'm paying, what do you say?" Neji's smirk actually became a smile. "With what you're offering for it, I can't help but accept. Tell me a little more about it." Naruto filled Neji in on the project. The project itself seemed to excite Neji greatly. The full extent of the pay he'd be receiving for it excited him even more. What excited him the most was that his duty for now would be very low-key, and he wouldn't have to worry about not being there should Tenten need to be taken to the hospital. Naruto finished. "Well, I've been providing meals for everybody, so, you and Tenten show up at my place at noon tomorrow, and you'll have lunch and dinner. When you come by, I'll brief you about our project schedule, and what exactly I'll need for you to do." "Sound good." "Sounds good," Neji responded. "Well, if there's nothing else," he turned to the Hokage, "Milady, may I be dismissed for the evening? I'm sure my wife would love to hear that she'll be seeing me more." Tsunade smiled and nodded. "Of course, Neji. Good night." Neji responded. "Thank you, milady. Good night to you." He paused as he then turned to Naruto and Kurenai, "And good night to the two of you as well. I'll see you tomorrow at noon," and with this, he vanished in a swirl of leaves. Naruto and Kurenai both helped Lady Tsunade finish filling in the details for the paperwork concerning the Genjutsu countering project, so that all Tsunade had to do was stamp and sign it. Half an hour later found Naruto and Kurenai leaving Tsunade's office, after wishing the Hokage and Shizune a good night. Naruto decided that he would walk Kurenai home tonight. Their route took them through the market district. As they were strolling along, reviewing with each other the results of the day's earlier clinical trials for the project and what they learned, they noticed what appeared to be a contingent of Hyuga clan members doing what could only be described as standing guard out front of one of Konoha's finer clothing stores. Kurenai frowned at the scene, knowing that these men were Hinata's escorts, yet another indicator of Hinata's change from kind, caring girl to cold, aloof clan heir. She noticed Naruto venturing a little closer to the store and decided to follow him. Naruto just felt that there was something off about the scene before him, which is what prompted him to investigate a little closer to see if he could glean a little more information. As he got closer, he heard what sounded like a heated argument inside of the store. He frowned grimly at this and began to stride towards the store's entrance. As he approached, the men standing guard, all branch family members now that Naruto was close enough to see their wrappings or hands around their foreheads, all moved closer, barring him entry. "I'm sorry, Lord Namikaze," began the man who appeared to be in charge of the contingent, "but Lady Hinata has instructed us to refuse entry to anyone while she's in the premises." Naruto was not happy with this. "Well, you can tell Lady Hyuga," the form of address was not lost on either Kurenai or the contingent, "that she can feel free to keep people from shopping in any businesses that she owns all she likes. But seeing as I own the building you're currently guarding, you will move aside and allow me entry, or I will forcibly move all of you," Naruto warned them as he narrowed his eyes and flared a little killing intent, "and believe me, you don't want me to do that." The contingent all began to sweat at the pressure they were feeling. Both Naruto and Kurenai also noticed that the inside of the store grew quiet as Naruto had done that. The Hyuga contingent simply bowed before him and moved aside. "Our apologies, Lord Namikaze. We were simply following orders. Truth be told, we don't like this any more than you do." "Not a problem. But please, make sure that your lady gets the word that I will not tolerate her doing this on my property, or in any other Konoha business that she does not herself own," he finished as he entered the store, Kurenai following, the Hyuga contingent all following him with their gaze. The moment Naruto entered the store, he spiked some of his killing intent once more and spoke very loudly in such a manner as to make sure that not only was he heard, but that it was understood that he meant business. Is there a problem here? The first person to turn their head in Naruto's direction was the sales associate who was manning the store at the time. The young girl, who couldn't be any older than 16, looked to be frightened to near hysterics, her green eyes having welled up with tears that had not yet begun to flow. She had wavy honey brown hair that extended to her shoulder blades and was kept in a ponytail, and was wearing a stylish cream-colored V-neck blouse with sleeves that frilled out at the elbows and ended at the upper edge of her forearms, the lower hem of the torso ending over black, cotton pants that hugged her hips and began to flare ever so slightly at the knee. On her feet, she wore casual, yet classy high-heel zip-up boots that appeared to be low-top, ending at just above the ankle, but covered by the hem of her pants. The fear in her eyes, if Naruto had to hazard a guess, had probably been instilled by her current and only customer. Said customer then slowly turned her head towards the source of the firm voice, showing herself to be none other than Hinata Hyuga, soon to be head of the Hyuga clan, her dark indigo hair put up in an ornate, elegant fashion, her style of dress having changed from a baggy coat and loose pants to a sleeveless, form-fitting lavender battle dress that accentuated her impressive bust, the skirt extending down to just above her ankles, but slid along the sides all the way to the hip, revealing legs that were covered in black leggings extending underneath elegant, black knee-high high-heeled shinobi sandal boots. At first glance, she would have been considered the epitome of nobility, grace and elegant beauty were it not for two things: the presence of Kurenai Yuhi, a woman who, even wearing her simple bandage-style dress with a single sleeve, outclassed the Hyuga heiress in all of these qualities, and the expression on Hinata's face. Her beautiful face was currently in the perpetual mild scowl that always seemed to adorn it these days. It had become so bad that the overall shape of her face had changed slightly, indicating that she spent so much time scowling and so little time smiling over the last 2 years that the muscles responsible for those facial expressions had strengthened and atrophied accordingly. It was her eyes, however, that contributed most to making this outwardly beautiful woman seem ugly. Those wondrous lavender eyes, once filled with kindness and compassion, giving her an angelic quality, were now hard, cold and cruel. One could see the bitterness in Hinata's soul through those eyes, and to those who knew the source of that bitterness, it was truly a sad thing to see. Both Naruto and Kurenai found themselves feeling saddened and disappointed with the woman standing before them now, and it apparently showed in their gaze. As Hinata noticed Naruto, there was a brief flash of love in her eyes, followed immediately by cold anger. As she noticed Kurenai, she didn't know what to feel in response to this. She had always seen Kurenai as a mother figure, and the feelings that could be discerned in her initial gaze reflected this. She flinched ever so slightly as she noticed the hurt yet resigned look of disappointment that she saw in Kurenai's expression. The fact that she was here at the same time as Naruto made it that much more painful. Hinata quickly collected herself and schooled her features and posture into an air of noble indifference. She responded in a tone that belied quiet, cold, controlled anger. "No. There is no problem. I was just on my way out." She walked towards the entrance, passing by the pair. As she saw Kurenai shaking her head sadly, Hinata felt a flash of anger at the pity that her former sensei seemed to be showing her. As she passed Naruto, she heard him warn her in a low tone, "Do not harass any of my employees or business partners in their places of business again. Do not bar entry into any places of business that I own again. If you have complaints, you can present them either to my partners or to me in a civil fashion, and we will address them quickly and accordingly. Do you have a problem with this, Lady Hyuga?" Feeling that flash of anger again, this time coupled with some hurt, she hated being addressed as Lady Hyuga by him. She looked directly at him before almost immediately schooling her features into the cold indifference that she was now known for and responding, "No, Lord Namikaze. I have no problem with this, and I will conduct myself accordingly in the future." With this, she turned her gaze forward and left the store, not looking back to either Naruto or Kurenai. As she left the store, her contingent fell into file around her, the group heading back to the direction of the Hyuga compound. Naruto let out a sigh that he didn't realize he'd been holding. Kurenai simply schooled her own features into a more neutral expression than she had been wearing a moment ago at the sadness she felt for the person her daughter had become. The sales associate, however, simply broke down into tears. At this, Naruto simply went over to her and gently placed both hands on her shoulders, his voice laced with concern. "Hey, Aina, are you alright?" The now identified Aina simply nodded that she was. "Yes sir, I'm okay. I just didn't know how to handle that situation. I didn't know if she would become hostile or violent, or what." Naruto simply shushed her, and attempted to comfort and reassure her. "Hey, it's okay. Dealing with shinobi can be like that. You can rest assured that she was trying to do nothing more than intimidate you. She wouldn't have hurt you, she would have been in serious trouble if she had tried, and she knows it."